It was 1961, and Michael Rockefeller was only 23 years old. Young, brilliant, and hungry for something the world's elite couldn't offer him: raw, untouched authenticity. As the son of Nelson Rockefeller, then governor of New York, and heir to one of the most powerful families in America, Michael's life had been built on skyscrapers, privilege, and power. But while others in his position embraced luxury, Michael craved the unknown. He wasn't interested in boardrooms or political dynasties. Instead, he set his sights on the untamed jungles of New Guinea, where whispers of ancient tribes and forbidden rituals beckoned him into darkness. Michael was fascinated by tribal art, especially the wood carvings of the Asmat people, an indigenous group living in isolation along the southwestern coast of what was then called Netherlands, New Guinea. Their intricate sculptures, steeped in ritual and blood, were unlike anything he'd seen. These were not mere artifacts. They were embodiments of ancestral spirits, symbols of power, war, and death. To Michael, the Asmat represented a doorway into a world untouched by Western civilization, a world that preserved something primal, sacred, dangerous. In October 1961, Michael returned to New Guinea as part of an ethnographic expedition sponsored by Harvard's Peabody Museum. He had been there earlier with filmmaker Robert Gardner, documenting the lives and rituals of the Dani people in the highlands. But now, he was venturing farther, deeper. He was determined to collect Asmat art firsthand and perhaps achieve something even more elusive: cultural immersion. But the deeper he went, the thinner the line became between curiosity and obsession. On November 17, 1961, Michael and Dutch anthropologist René Vossing boarded a narrow catamaran to travel along the coast, laden with artifacts and supplies. The sea was deceptively calm. Then the waves grew violent. The boat capsized off the coast near the mouth of the Islandan River. Their two local guides swam for help, disappearing into the blue-gray horizon. Michael and René clung to the overturned hull for 24 hours, exposed to the blistering sun, dehydrated, weak. Then, on the morning of November 19th, Michael made a fateful decision. "I think I can make it," he said, stripping down and tying empty gas cans around his waist as makeshift flotation. With Vossing watching helplessly, Michael pushed off the wreck and began paddling toward the distant shoreline, toward a land unknown, possibly hostile. It was the last time anyone ever saw him. From that moment, the story fractured into rumor, speculation, and myth. Did Michael drown in the churning current? Did he reach land only to collapse from exhaustion? Or did something far more chilling happen on that desolate coast? The official search would mobilize helicopters, warships, and thousands of dollars. But it would find nothing. No body, no belongings. Just silence. And in silence, monsters grow. Years later, a theory emerged that would ignite one of the most chilling mysteries of the 20th century: that Michael Rockefeller didn't die at sea. He was killed and cannibalized by the very tribe he sought to understand. The moment Michael vanished into the sea, a wave of panic swept across the Western world. The Rockefeller name carried power and prestige that transcended borders. This wasn't just any missing person. This was the son of one of the most influential families on Earth. Within hours, a massive search operation was launched. American and Dutch authorities scrambled helicopters, military vessels, and reconnaissance teams to scour the coastline and jungle. The official line was cautious. Michael Rockefeller was missing, presumed lost at sea. But as days turned into weeks and no body surfaced, doubts began to fester. What if he had made it to shore? What would he have found waiting for him? The region he disappeared into was among the most remote and hostile on the planet. Swamps, thick jungle, and tribal territories layered with centuries of secrecy. The Asmat territory was particularly feared. Though officially under Dutch control, it was a lawless region in practice, where government presence was minimal, and the ancient traditions of war, revenge, and ritual killing still pulsed beneath the surface. For generations, the Asmat were headhunters. They believed in the power of spirits, in the need for balance through death. They didn't kill for chaos. They killed for order, for justice, for blood debts owed and spirits waiting to be avenged. Unbeknownst to most outsiders, just a few years before Michael's arrival, the Dutch colonial forces had brutally punished several Asmat villages following the murder of missionaries and soldiers. Leaders had been executed. Sacred rituals disrupted. Spirits, in the Asmat view, were enraged. Many anthropologists later suggested that such wounds, unhealed and festering, could have easily made Michael, a white outsider arriving uninvited, a symbolic target. Not a man, but an offering. But these were just theories, until the whispers started. In the following months and years, strange reports trickled out of the region, stories told in half-hushed voices by traders, missionaries, and colonial officers who claimed to have heard something, seen something. A tall white man seen deep in the jungle, surrounded by villagers. Bones found, meticulously stripped of flesh. Ritual drums echoing at night, louder than usual. Most of the accounts were dismissed as fantasy, fueled by grief or madness. But some of them were chillingly consistent. One of the most startling came from a Dutch missionary who had spent years living among the Asmat. He claimed that villagers, during a drunken confession, spoke of killing a white man who had emerged from the sea. They had speared him, decapitated him, and, following ancient ritual, consumed his flesh. The body, they said, had released the spirit of their fallen leaders. The balance had been restored. The ghosts had been fed. Still, without evidence, the Rockefeller family refused to believe it. Nelson Rockefeller used his vast influence to keep the story under tight control. Official reports stuck to the narrative of accidental drowning. Yet behind closed doors, there were meetings, quiet, intense conversations about what really might have happened. Michael's twin sister, Mary, later confessed that she believed her brother had reached land and met a fate no family could bear to imagine. As the years rolled on, the jungle swallowed the story. But rumors don't rot like flesh. They linger. They evolve. And in the darkness of New Guinea's forests, among the drumbeats and shadows, the legend of Michael Rockefeller only grew stronger. As the official narrative cooled into silence, the jungle never stopped talking. Among anthropologists, adventurers, and covert operatives, Michael Rockefeller's disappearance morphed into a ghost story, one grounded not in fantasy, but in half-truths and forgotten files. In the decades that followed, the case would be reopened time and time again, not by governments, but by curious minds who couldn't let go. One such man was Karl Hoffman, a journalist obsessed with the idea that the truth had been buried beneath politics, colonial shame, and fear. His search wouldn't begin until over 50 years after Michael's disappearance, but it would take him deeper than anyone had dared to go. But long before Hoffman's expedition, a few brave individuals had already followed the whispers into Asmat territory. Some of them were missionaries, who heard chilling tales passed around fires. Others were Dutch colonial officers who carried photographs of Michael, asking the locals if they had seen this man. And what they heard was always the same. No denials, but not quite confessions either. Stories told with averted eyes. A knowing silence. Sometimes, a name. Otsianep, a remote Asmat village along the coast. Locals hinted that Otsianep had a dark secret buried in its past, one the elders would not speak of aloud. When asked directly about Michael Rockefeller, they would say, "He came. He died. That is all." One of the most unnerving accounts came from a Catholic priest named Father Van Kessel, who had lived among the Asmat for years. In a letter written to Dutch authorities, but never officially published, he detailed a disturbing conversation. The villagers told him that 4 men from Otsianep had killed a white outsider who swam ashore, mistaking him for a spirit or enemy. They speared him, decapitated him, and distributed his body parts according to ritual. The head was boiled. The bones were kept. The flesh, eaten. The names of the alleged killers were given. The ritual was described in vivid detail. The implication was horrifying. Not only had Michael reached the shore, he had become a sacrament. But Father Van Kessel's letter disappeared into the depths of bureaucratic indifference. No arrests were made. No charges were filed. The Dutch, approaching the end of their colonial rule in the region, wanted no scandal. The Americans, perhaps fearing political embarrassment or international backlash, stayed silent. Michael's death was, officially, an accident at sea. Case closed. Except, it never really was. Years later, when Carl Hoffman arrived in New Guinea to retrace Michael's steps, he carried not only the weight of decades of speculation, but fragments of forbidden knowledge. Through interviews with Dutch officials, tribal members, and forgotten files, he slowly uncovered what felt like a cover-up. He found that Dutch authorities had known far more than they ever admitted, that even American operatives may have been informed of Michael's death by cannibalism and chose to bury the truth for diplomatic reasons. In Otjanep, Hoffman met descendants of the alleged killers. He sat in the same huts. He watched the same rituals Michael had once yearned to witness. And he heard once again the story. That a white man had come from the sea, and that his body had restored spiritual balance to the village. But now the story had aged. Like a myth told too many times, the names were fading, the details smudged. And yet, the silence between sentences was louder than any confirmation. This was the paradox of Michael Rockefeller's fate, a mystery hiding in plain sight. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one would ever say it aloud. By the time the Rockefeller family withdrew their private search teams from New Guinea, the jungle had reclaimed its secrets, and the world, hungry for resolution, began to mythologize the unknown. Michael's disappearance became something more than a tragedy. It became a question mark at the end of a legacy, a symbol of Western arrogance, a cautionary tale of what happens when modern man stares too deeply into the primal abyss. And while official records listed him as presumed dead, the stories among the Asmat were passed on like oral scripture, fluid, shifting, but always anchored in one unshakable truth. The white man came, and the spirits were satisfied. But why would the Rockefeller name, so powerful, so politically charged, fall silent on the matter? Theories flooded in. Some said the family, aware of Michael's death at the hands of the Asmat, chose secrecy over scandal. The Cold War was raging. Nelson Rockefeller was eyeing higher office. To admit that his son had been killed and cannibalized by an indigenous tribe might not just be a personal tragedy, but a geopolitical embarrassment. Others believed there were financial motives. By declaring Michael legally dead without confirming his fate, the estate could be resolved cleanly. No mess, no questions, no war drums echoing from across the Pacific. Yet, in the shadows of academic circles and underground intelligence chatter, whispers of the truth never died. Unpublished cables suggested that U.S. diplomats stationed in Indonesia had received credible information about Michael's fate, but were instructed to stand down. Missionaries who lived in the Asmat villages claimed they were warned to stop asking questions. Even anthropologists began to speak in riddles, couching what they knew in euphemism. He went too far, one said. He crossed a line, spiritually, culturally, fatally. Still, not everyone accepted the cannibalism theory at face value. A rival narrative emerged, that Michael had survived the ordeal and was taken in by the tribe, that he may have lived among them for months, maybe even years, before dying of illness, injury, or simple despair. One speculative account suggested he had gone native, abandoning his identity and integrating with the Asmat as a spiritual equal. In this version, Michael wasn't a victim, but a convert, a willing exile. a man who had finally found the raw, untamed truth he sought, and embraced it until his last breath. But if that were true, why no proof? Why no sightings, no photos, no artifacts? Some suggested he had been painted in the red ochre of the warriors, his face tattooed beyond recognition. Others claimed he had taken a new name, forgotten his own. The Asmat, for their part, remained eerily silent. When asked, they responded the same way every time. The white man is gone. He belongs to the spirits now. What few outsiders understood was the cultural gravity of such a statement. In Asmat belief, the line between the living and the dead is not absolute. Spirits walk among men. The recently dead are often more powerful than the living. To consume someone is not to destroy them. It's to absorb their essence, their strength, their mana. And in this worldview, Michael hadn't just died. He had been transformed, integrated, made eternal. Back home in New York's marble halls and high-rises, Michael's disappearance was sanitized, intellectualized, and, eventually, forgotten. But in the swamps of southwestern New Guinea, his presence lingered like fog. His image, carved unknowingly into ritual totems. His story murmured over flickering fires. The boy who came from the sea, carrying cameras and questions, and vanished into myth. Years turned into decades, and still, the jungle refused to give up its dead. But what the land concealed, the imagination illuminated. The mystery of Michael Rockefeller wasn't just a forgotten case. It became a magnet for obsession. Adventurers, conspiracy theorists, journalists, and even spiritual seekers ventured into the heart of New Guinea in pursuit of answers. Each believed they could succeed where governments, militaries, and missionaries had failed. But the deeper they went, the more they found themselves consumed not by truth, but by the same fog that swallowed Michael in 1961. Among the most determined was Milt Macklin, a journalist and explorer who coined the phrase Michael Rockefeller Lives in the late 1960s. He claimed to have received a tip from an informant in Indonesia. A tall white man was being held captive in a remote village. According to the story, Michael had been spared because the tribe believed he was a spirit, not a man. Macklin traveled to the region, interviewed locals, and even obtained statements suggesting the Asmat had indeed encountered a foreigner around the time Michael disappeared. But his investigation hit a wall. The locals clammed up. Guides refused to venture further inland. Dutch officials brushed him off. And so, like so many before him, Macklin left with more questions than answers. Then came the photographs. Grainy, sun-bleached images taken during expeditions in the 1970s and 1980s began to circulate. One in particular caused a stir. It showed a tall, pale-skinned man, naked except for tribal decorations, standing among Asmat villagers. His hair was long, his expression unreadable. Could it be Michael? For a moment the world held its breath. But the man in the photo was never definitively identified, and no further evidence ever surfaced. Whether it was an outsider gone native or simply a misidentified European traveler remains unsolved. Meanwhile, the Rockefeller family maintained an iron curtain of silence. No interviews, no statements. The only clues came from Mary Rockefeller, Michael's twin sister, who spoke carefully, perhaps even cryptically, in later years. "Michael went on a journey," she once said, "one from which he could not return." It wasn't grief in her voice. It was reverence, as if she knew something the rest of the world did not, or had made peace with a truth too sacred or too horrific to share. Behind closed doors, more revelations emerged. Declassified documents hinted that intelligence agencies, both Dutch and American, had been monitoring the region long after the official search ended. Why? What were they hoping to contain or conceal? Theories abounded. That Michael had stumbled upon sensitive political movements. That his death, and the cover-up that followed, had less to do with ritual cannibalism and more to do with controlling narratives in a decolonizing world. In a place where Western influence was being violently resisted, the murder of a Rockefeller could have sparked retaliation. The easier story: he drowned. The safer one: he was never found. But among the Asmat, the tale lived on, not as tragedy, but as legend. In certain villages, elders told stories of a white ghost who came from the ocean, a man who walked into their world with cameras, maps, and questions, and who, through death, became part of something larger. His bones scattered into ritual, his name lost in translation. His story burned into oral history like the carvings etched into their sacred bish poles, symbols of vengeance, spirits, and transitions between worlds. Michael Rockefeller had not simply vanished. He had crossed into myth. In the years that followed, the name Michael Rockefeller took on a spectral weight. No longer just the missing son of American royalty, but a symbol of what lies beyond the edge of civilization. His story seeped into pop culture, folklore, and academic debate. Books were written, documentaries produced, yet none could answer the fundamental question: what drives a man, raised in the lap of privilege, to risk everything in pursuit of the unknown? The answer, perhaps, was hidden in Michael's journals, fragments of thoughts recovered from his time in New Guinea. In them, he wrote of transcendence, of escaping modernity, of becoming part of something primal and pure. One passage stood out: "I am coming to the realization that I must find a place where I am not a stranger, a place where things matter in a different way." That yearning, so romantic on the page, became chilling in hindsight. Because Michael didn't just study tribal life, he sought to dissolve into it. He wasn't an observer, he was an aspirant, and that hunger to belong, to disappear, may have led him straight into the jaws of the sacred and the savage. Meanwhile, the Asmat remained untouched by the obsession that gripped the West. To them, the story was not unusual. Strangers come, strangers go, spirits rise, balance returns. Their cosmology does not revolve around forensic evidence or televised closure. It lives in rhythm and ritual, in silence and song. For those who believe Michael was consumed, they point to the ancient belief that to eat a man is to honor him, to make his essence part of the living, to take in his strength, his knowledge, his soul. But even that explanation felt insufficient to outsiders, too alien, too final. And so the world kept looking. In 2014, more than half a century after Michael's disappearance, journalist Carl Hoffman published Savage Harvest, a deep investigation into the Rockefeller mystery. Unlike previous attempts, Hoffman lived among the Asmat for extended periods, earning their trust, listening not just to words, but to what was left unsaid. He pieced together confessions passed down through generations, consistent, specific, undeniable. According to several sources, Michael had indeed reached the shore alive. He had been helped out of the water, and then he was killed. Why? The reasons echoed across interviews like a drumbeat: revenge, balance, ancestral command. The death of Michael Rockefeller, they said, had spiritual purpose. He had become part of the cycle. His death was not murder. It was meaning. The power of Hoffman's work wasn't just in what it revealed. It was in what it confirmed, that the silence surrounding Michael's fate had never been accidental. It had been orchestrated, a shield against truth, because the truth was ugly, politically volatile, culturally explosive. To admit that the son of a Rockefeller had been ritually killed and consumed by the very people he came to study would force the world to confront uncomfortable realities about colonial arrogance, about the thinness of civilization, about what happens when you mistake curiosity for immunity. And yet, Hoffman, like all who came before him, left without proof. No bones, no belongings, just words, powerful, whispered words. Michael Rockefeller's story had become a paradox. The deeper you looked, the less you saw. The closer you got, the more the jungle swallowed you whole. By the time the world caught up to the full gravity of Michael Rockefeller's disappearance, it was already too late to change the story. It had taken root, like jungle vines creeping over forgotten ruins. What remained wasn't merely a question of life or death, but of transformation. In the West, Michael had vanished. But in the Asmat worldview, he had been transfigured. His journey wasn't about survival. It was about becoming part of something older, deeper, and immune to cameras, microphones, or satellite eyes. This duality, between the Western hunger for resolution and the tribal embrace of ambiguity, became the heartbeat of the mystery. To the Rockefellers, Michael was a son, a twin, a legacy cut short. To the Asmat, he was no longer a man. He was a spirit, embedded in the bones of the village, in the carvings of Bish poles, in the chants passed from elder to child. He had ceased to be an individual and become myth, and myth has a strange power. It repels closure. Among the villagers of Otsjanep, Hoffman learned of a secret ritual rarely performed, one that honored spirits who had crossed over but had not yet found rest. These were the wandering ones, those who had died far from home, who came to the Asmat without invitation, and whose energy still lingered. Michael's name was never said aloud during the ceremony, but the symbolism was unmistakable. A tall effigy, a boat carved with foreign features, the ghost of a man who came from the sea. Hoffman sat through the ritual in silence, his camera unused, his voice still. He would later write that he felt like he was watching a funeral that had waited 50 years to begin. Back in the West, few could digest the implications. The idea that Michael Rockefeller, a Yale graduate, a future titan of society, was killed and consumed, not with hatred but with spiritual reverence, was too much to bear. And yet, the story endured. Museums began quietly questioning the provenance of their Asmat collections. Anthropologists debated whether collecting artifacts from such encounters was ethical. And conspiracy theorists continued to dig, obsessed with every angle, every clue, every blurred photo that might confirm or deny the unthinkable. Meanwhile, the Rockefeller family remained silent, dignified, walled off. But there were cracks in the marble. At a private lecture, a friend of the family once revealed that Michael's mother, Mary, had consulted spiritual mediums long after the official search was over. Some claimed she had even flown in shamans from South America, desperate to make contact, not for evidence, but for peace. The rituals were quiet, private, but the intent was clear. Michael's body was never found, but perhaps his soul still wandered. And what of the Asmat today? Modernization has crept into their world. Cell phones, solar panels, even tourists. But the old ways still breathe beneath the surface. Elders remember. Some still claim to know the truth. But when asked directly, they shake their heads. He came from the sea. He is gone. The spirits have him now. And maybe that's the answer. Michael Rockefeller did not die. He did not disappear. He crossed over, from man to myth, from explorer to offering. His story does not live in headlines or grave markers. It lives in the rhythm of drums, the heat of ritual fires, the echo of paddles striking black water beneath a blood-orange sky. A legacy not etched in stone, but whispered through the jungle, forever unfinished. Decades have passed. The trees have grown taller. The riverbanks have shifted. And yet, the story of Michael Rockefeller still lingers in the air, as heavy as the jungle heat. His name is spoken in two very different worlds, one of boardrooms and museums, and one of spirit drums and carved canoes. And in both, he is a symbol of ambition, of obsession, of the line that divides the known from the unknowable. To the modern world, his disappearance remains a mystery without a solution. But maybe that's why it endures. Maybe that's what gives it power. Michael didn't simply vanish. He became the embodiment of what happens when Western certainty collides with the primal force of a world it cannot control. He sought understanding. He found transformation. He went looking for truth and became part of a legend. Today, if you journey deep into the Asmat region, into the mangrove channels where the sky darkens even at noon and the hum of insects forms a living wall of sound, you may still see traces of him. Not in remains, not in evidence, but in the way the elders glance over their shoulders when telling old stories. In the intricate patterns of wood carvings that resemble a face not born in the jungle. In the rhythmic beat of ceremonies meant to awaken ancestral spirits. There, in the margins of firelight, the white ghost of the sea still dances. And in the west, his image remains frozen in time. A young man with a camera slung over his shoulder, eyes full of wonder and defiance, caught forever in the moment before he crossed a line he could never return from. Scholars continue to dissect his journals. Filmmakers pitch new documentaries. Families visit museum wings filled with artifacts he helped collect. But none of it feels real. Because Michael's story isn't about artifacts or analysis. It's about what happens when a man chases meaning into the wilderness and becomes a part of it. His tale continues to haunt us, not because of its horror, but because of its beauty. The beauty of a life lived fearlessly. The beauty of mystery that resists resolution. The beauty of surrender to a force greater than any one person, greater than any civilization. And maybe that's the answer no one wants to say aloud. That Michael got exactly what he was looking for. Not headlines, not answers, but immersion, disappearance, transcendence. So now when someone asks, what really happened to Michael Rockefeller? The honest answer might be the simplest one. He vanished. Not just from sight, from time, from history, from expectation. And somewhere, in a village by the sea, the drums still beat, the fire still burns, and a white spirit, carried on the tide, still walks among the trees.